concept that we've come up with. I'm reading my story. Actually, October 2nd is the 86th anniversary of the train tunnel collapse that happened just behind us, where 4 people died that they know about. 2 were pulled from the wreckage. I think 2 are missing. And that's what my story's about, and it's set today, so enjoy. And actually, it's the story of Alyssa, who wakes up screaming from explosions, and she has this urge to go to Hollywood Cemetery and visit a certain crypt, and that's where I'm starting the story. An eerie feeling came over Alyssa when she parked in the space across from the cemetery building. She got out of her car and looked around. Her senses had sharpened. Every detail of the lush ivy and this old stone wall entrance stood out with bold shadows and dark green angles. A wren scolded her as she passed by down the street. She could almost smell the mustiness of the crypts across the small valley of holly and cedar. It's funny how significant historical places in your own town that people travel miles to visit, you never give much thought. Alyssa hadn't been here in years. She strolled past the Confederate officer's arch. Robins darted away from her frantically. She thought about the mold on the arch, how it needed some cleaning, or if the aged look was more suitable for the dead of a lost cause. Construction. Approaching the bottom of the hill at the turn, she saw fresh red clay in large mounds and 2 mid-sized bulldozers perched on either side. Alyssa was concerned at first that maybe a casket had been turned up or worse. For some reason, she thought of genocide and the image of hundreds of bodies being pushed into large dirt graves by metal machines. Dispelling the grim myth, I always say that, dispelling the grim thought quickly led Alyssa to one of the last times she was here. She was 19, maybe 20, with some of her college friends trying to sneak in this very corner in the middle of the night. Emily was there, and so was her first husband, Richard. A group of them were hanging out after the evening sociology class. Richard was renting one of those row houses across the street from campus. Usually 5 or 6 of them got together afterwards. Sometimes it was a study session, other times they drank to the thick of the morning. That particular night, and maybe it was because finals were over and the cheap beer brought on some bravado, they came up with the idea. Who doesn't think about creeping around there when you're young, adventurous, and full of booze like that? It wasn't too long of a walk to Oregon Hill from Harrison Street, so they headed over to the corner and the hole where a hole in the wire fence was supposed to be. Unfortunately, the hole was boarded up, so they decided to bail on the idea and walk down by the train tracks to watch the sunrise instead. Alyssa remembered them all sitting on the railroad embankment at the bottom of the hill. Emily and Richard were being all lovey-dovey wretchedness, quietly kissing and whispering stupid things to each other every so often. She listened to the river sounds. Most everyone was quiet by that point, dozing from the all-nighter or enjoying the calmness as well. There was a serenity, a certain peacefulness in the view as the sun peeked behind the trees downriver. It was an etched memory. It had given her a warm feeling, like she had always been here. As the bright sun rose higher, she looked back toward the cemetery and thought just for a moment that she saw other people in there, dancing or twirling around headstones. Maybe they had found another way in, and then they were gone in the blink of an eye. Wow, that was a long time ago, Alyssa said to herself. She smiled a little, seeing the railroad tracks just beyond the upturned piles of clay, and shook her head out of the memory. That still wasn't an answer to the dream. Where was that crypt? Was it the pool crypt? Yes. Alyssa rounded the turn and made her way back up the hill. There were so many interesting graves around. Even though she hadn't been to this place in such a long time, she remembered one of the great things about Hollywood is that you could always find something you've never noticed before. An odd statue, some aligned symbols on a headstone, the death dates of a married couple being the same day, only 30 years later. There's a stillness vibe to the place. Cars and people drifted by her in the background so seamlessly that it felt as if everything here paced itself in slow motion. The rest of the world was flying by, practically spinning off the planet, but here, things barely moved. An abrupt sense of being watched hit her. At first she tried to blame a breeze, maybe the same cold breeze in her dream, but nothing was moving around her. Alyssa looked again for the car that had just passed, but it had gone to the far side of the cemetery. She was alone here. She looked at the crypt to her left. It was the infamous pool. Somehow a legend was born that this is where the Richmond vampire resided. In the early 20th century, some railroad workers were in a train tunnel in Church Hill. The engine exploded and buried them. The legend had it that a specter crawled from the collapsed tunnel and ran madly across town, being chased by people, and supposedly took up residence here. Alyssa rolled her eyes. Bullshit tales. She really knew the story derived from one of the victims, Benjamin Mosby, whose skin was so badly burned in the disaster that he died later that evening. Knowing the answer to the legend still didn't stave off her anxiousness. This burial was in need of repair. It almost represented all the spooky rumors it received. The unkempt shrub that curled over the concrete ledge above the door, the built-up grime and the name and date of the keystone, The 2 iron columns, all that remained of an iron fence, now rested away. Alyssa walked closer, trying to peer in. Touching the contour of the gray stone archway leading to the door was as cold as the feeling on the back of her neck. The iron bars on the gate of the outer door were starting to rust at the top. There was a lone faded rose tied there by someone, probably from a few weeks ago. She wondered who. The plaster walls on the other side were eroding, revealing the brick underneath and making red dust on the ground like anthills. The small, solid door to the inner crypt was rusted with a half-inch crevice opening at the edge. A few of the bars to the inner crypt had now rusted away entirely, and the windows were broken out, allowing a strained view inside. She leaned in more, her forehead pressing against the bars of the outer door. Her eyes narrowed, adjusting to the darkness of the actual crypt. Something moved. Surely a squirrel inside on the window ledge? No, it's larger, with more intention. Wait, there's a hand. Fingers flat, prying through the crevice of the inner door crypt, trying to find purchase to open and get through. Alyssa let out a gasp. At the same time, a hiss reverberated from the crypt. She fell back. What the fuck? She stumbled, turning to catch herself from the fall, landing on her hands with the pool crypt behind her, over her, looming like a haunted obelisk. She gripped the concrete with her fingers, her legs like wheels spinning in place, moved her forward and up toward the road. It felt like a mouse dream, the hawk swooping down for its prey, the vision suddenly gone, as she heard a car come from the other side of the small valley. Alyssa straightened up and walked to the road. She watched the car drive around the bend by the construction area and thought how absurd she must have looked to them. Her heart was still racing. Was that real? She cautiously looked back to the crypt. Thank you.